Hello and welcome to Diamond Webinars. We've just opened the attendee doors and people are starting to gather. We'll be with you in just a moment and we'll get started. As a note, we have closed captioning available and an ASL interpreter. So please configure your own Zoom settings to pin Kate the interpreter or enable closed captioning from the bottom bar. We'll see you in just a moment. Welcome to Diamond Webinars. We're here on the 9th Annual Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Diamond has once again put together our State of Accessibility report, which we'll be reviewing soon. But first, a little bit about myself, a little bit about Diamond. I'm Jonathan DeArmas, partner here at Diamond. Diamond is a digital agency built by developers with a commitment to well-crafted software built on best practices. We support media companies and brand names who rely on us every single day for product strategy, experience design, and full stack development services. Everything we do has inclusive design at its core and accessibility from the beginning. If we start it with the DNA from the start, we can have applications for everyone. Diamond proudly sponsors Global Accessibility Awareness Day, founded in 2012 and occurring on the third Thursday each May. The purpose of GAD is to get everyone talking, thinking, and learning about digital access, inclusion for people with different disabilities. GAD has turned into a global event. 9th year now, heading into the 10th. I know that some of the panelists on the show today will be coming from various events and going to others. It's quite exciting to see how GAD has grown. Diamond launched our accessibility practice to marry our love of building this great software with our commitment to the accessibility community. We offer assessments, audits, general consulting, also development for remediation efforts. With all of that in mind, we have a lot to cover today, a lot of amazing panelists from across the industry. I would like to introduce Joe Devon, who's the co-founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day and also the co-founder of Diamond. Joe, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm trying to turn on the video, but it's not working. I think I need that to be done from you, Jonathan. Oh, there we go. Oh, hello. There I am. Can we turn on the slide deck, please? So to start, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for the 9th Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Next slide, please. The agenda here is Jonathan, who just started, and then I'm going to welcome the panelists. We're going to talk about the state of accessibility. We're going to get a special guest in Jennison, my co-founder at Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and then Matt King from Facebook, and I will end off with some final thoughts. Next slide, please. GAD has taken off far beyond anything that Jennison and I could have ever expected. Last year, we've hit a Twitter reach of 195 million unique users, and just scanning the GAD hashtag today, it feels like it's going to be bigger this year. And every year we think it can't get any bigger, and it always does. And we've had, I think, 175 or 180 events posted on the GAD website. So it's incredible to see that this year, everybody is able from just about anywhere to access most of those events. And yet, I always like to keep my eye on the ball. And it always strikes me as GAD rolls around, I always come back to this tweet that I saw in 2015. You have most of the folks that know anything about GAD are just posting all this celebration and positive things, and it's really a joy to watch. However, there was one tweet by The Blind Onion, which is a satirical Twitter account, and they tweeted out, "The world eagerly anticipates participating in the next 364 days of global accessibility oblivion, hashtag GAD." And it did hurt when I first saw it, but I always mention it when I talk about GAD because the goal of GAD was to get awareness originally it was among the developer culture because that's where I came from, but we've kind of grown that to designers and product people as well. And if you get a tweet like this coming out of pain where the rest of the year is inaccessible, where you have all these folks talking about accessibility, but we're not changing the state of the internet and the state of the web and apps as well, then we're not really achieving the goal. And it just made me think we need to create a state of accessibility report. Next slide, please. So to that end, last year, we did the first state of accessibility report. You're going to hear from some folks that collaborated with us on the second year. Jared Smith has been with us both years, and he does an analysis of the top 1,000,000 websites. And the numbers are not great, and I'll let him speak to that. But on the Diamond side, we have internally done some research, and please the next slide, or actually the infographic. On the top left there, you see a little blurb from the Diamond part of the report of the Alexa top 100 websites. And this has come from speaking to people that use assistive technology that have a common issue, which is you might have some sites that actually try to do their best with accessibility, but if you don't think about the user journey, you're missing something big. And something that happens frequently is right at the gate. What is a service worth if you're not able to register, if you're not able to then log in and log out? Imagine you can log in and then you can't log out, and then you're tracked every time you go there, and you can't switch accounts to another user account. This is obviously problematic. So what we've done is we created, we did a manual test of the Alexa top 100 websites for their accessibility and their ability to register, log in, and log out. And what we found is that 40% of the top 100 websites are fully accessible on all platforms tested. Now, I wouldn't call this a good score, but my whole goal with the State of Accessibility report, otherwise known as SOAR, is that it should improve every single year. And this is one of the few bright spots, is that we've seen some improvement in the Alexa top 100, because if this year 40% of the sites are fully accessible, last year that number was 29%. So, excuse me, it went up 11%. So that's a good number. And then in terms of the sites that were inaccessible this year, we found 39% of the top 100 websites are fully inaccessible on all platforms tested. And although that number is too high, it is better than last year. Last year it was 43%. And you can see that the 40% bubble is bigger than the 39% bubble. And we've at least crossed the chasm where there are more sites fully accessible than sites fully inaccessible. Now, again, this is the top 100 websites. This is not wonderful news, but at least if we're going in the right direction, then personally, I can feel better about it, because people constantly say thank you for doing Global Accessibility Awareness Day, but I can't accept that thank you until I see that the numbers are improving and that we've actually made a difference. So I don't want to see that blind onion tweet again, because I'd like to see that we've actually changed and changed the culture, the developer culture and digital product creation culture, to make things better. I'll end off by just also saying that in addition to that 40%, we have 21% that are accessible with difficulties. So last year, wait, is that 21%? Yeah, I think that's the right number. And I think last year it was 28%. So there are less sites that are accessible with difficulty, and the improvement went to becoming fully accessible. So we've definitely had a decent degree of improvement in the last year when it came to the top manual sites. Now I'm going to pass it on to Jared. So I'd like to invite you, Jared, to turn on your video. And please introduce yourself and speak through your numbers.
Sure. Thank you for the invitation to be here and the opportunity to speak a little bit about WebAIM's work on accessibility and some of the research that we've done. Happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day to everyone, and thank you, Jennison and Joe, for your vision and really your efforts to try to change the culture and the environment of accessibility. So I'm from WebAIM, which is the Web Accessibility in Mind project. We're a nonprofit consultancy that does web accessibility. One of our missions at WebAIM is to provide research on web accessibility to help inform the state of accessibility, where we're at, and help effect change. One of those efforts that we started about a year and a half ago was an analysis of the home pages for the top 1 million websites. So we had a pretty good sense of accessibility and what some of the difficulties were that were out there, but we didn't have really good data. And generally, the accessibility field needs more data. So we conducted this analysis. It used automated processes to check these 1 million home pages. Our first analysis was in February of 2019. We did another analysis 1 year later, February of this year. This year, we also added 130,000 other pages, deeper pages within the top 1,300 websites. So over the course of just over a year, we now have about 1 billion data points of accessibility for web pages. So we collect lots of information about accessibility, about technology usage, site metadata, language, and just a lot of things that we then analyze to see what's happening when it comes to accessibility. The results, we have an overview report available on the webaim.org website, and I encourage you to go check that out. So this year, as we conducted our analysis of these 1 million homepages, we found about 61 million errors. So these are detectable errors via an automated process using our WAVE accessibility evaluation tool. So that's about 61 errors per homepage on average. So if you think about that, on an average homepage, a user with a disability might expect to encounter 61 barriers on average. That was an increase of about 2% from 2019. Now, that does bring up an interesting question of, does that mean that accessibility is getting worse? I don't know. There were more detectable errors. Joe and his team, their research on functional accessibility for some of the top websites for registration, log in, log out, found that things had improved, which is wonderful. Our analysis was primarily automated accessibility data. We found 98% of those home pages had detectable failures with the web content accessibility guidelines. That was an increase, a little increase from the year before. So because these are automatically detectable issues, that would suggest that the overall compliance or conformance rate of home pages with the web content accessibility guidelines is probably very, very low. I think certainly under 1%. But we have guidelines as a foundation, as a good measure for at least some aspects of accessibility. So we have, even though the conformance rate is very low, it's great that we have guidelines out there to help us move that needle a little bit closer towards accessibility. One thing we did find this year that was pretty alarming, very interesting, was a 10% increase in the number of page elements over the course of 1 year. That's a big, big increase, 10% in 1 year, 10% more, paragraphs, divs, spans, buttons, whatever, those page elements might be. That suggests, I think, a real increase in the complexity and weight of home pages. And it, I think, begs the question as to whether accessibility can keep up with that level of increase in complexity. It's an interesting question. As we analyze the types of issues that were detected, 86%, that's 86% of home pages had contrast errors, so text that did not have sufficient contrast with the background as defined by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. On average, there were 36 instances of low contrast text per home page. 66% of pages were missing alternative text, so they had images that did not have appropriate alternative text. 66% of pages had empty links or buttons. So these are things that, say, a screen reader user could navigate to, but there would be no presentational text to identify the function of those links or buttons. 54% of home pages had form inputs that were missing labels. So over half of all inputs on home pages are missing properly associated labels that would describe the functionality of those inputs. 28% of pages did not have a document language identified. Little tiny snippet of code you can add to a page that would ensure that the language that a screen reader reads that page in is correct for the content. These are all pretty impactful accessibility issues. They're all readily detectable, and they're all readily fixable. That is one thing that gives me some optimism. Even though there are a lot of accessibility issues that are present, the vast majority fit into these 5 categories. In other words, if we were to systematically address just these 5 issues, the positive impact for users with disabilities would be just enormous. We're talking about millions and millions of potential barriers removed on these top home pages. We also, this year, aligned accessibility information with site categories. So there were a lot of different categories that we analyzed, and we noticed, we found that there were pretty significant differences in accessibility issues based on the type of content that those pages were presenting. For instance, news websites had over twice as many detectable errors as government sites. So news sites were the absolute worst category, which is a little alarming, especially in the age of COVID and all of these other things that there's so many barriers to getting news information. Government websites fared the best, but there's a big disparity between those. Knowing that information might allow us to better target particular categories, or to see what models there are, what types of sites are doing a good job, that we can maybe generate models and patterns that can best address accessibility more globally. We also analyzed technologies that are present on home pages. So there are just hundreds of technologies that were detectable on home pages, things like PHP, WordPress, React, Google Maps, Google Ads, things like that. And if those technologies were present, we then did comparisons to see how things were different with those pages. We found some interesting things. There were certain technologies that aligned with a lot more accessibility errors, some technologies that aligned with fewer errors. And that's really an increased focus for us, for Joe and the Diamond team, is to see what technologies are doing well, which ones appear to need some work, so we can start to affect change. We know that addressing accessibility in those frameworks and building a culture and environment of accessibility around those tools can have a really, really big impact. So there's a whole lot more available at webaim.org. We have our full report there. Our intent with this is to help set a benchmark for where we're at and a metric for where we're going with accessibility, and to start to affect change. Even though this can be a little discouraging seeing the prevalence of accessibility issues, if we focus on just those primary issues and those technologies and frameworks, we can make a difference. And that's part of Global Accessibility Awareness Day and the pledge. And for those of us that have taken the pledge, that are committed to this, maybe today could be Global Accessibility Action Day. We can go out and start to do something about this to make a difference.
Oh my God, I love that, Jared. Hang tight for a second. I'm gonna ask you a question, but first I'd like to tell the audience that if you see below, there's a Q&A button, and if you ask the Q&A, we are going to call on some questions later on. Now, Jared, first of all, I love that Global Accessibility Action Day. Oh my God, that's fantastic. I don't know how, but we got to use that one. Could you speak for a second to the comparison between last year and this year? You're still on mute, by the way.
Yeah, like I said, we saw some shifts in accessibility data itself, not only overall errors and conformance rates with the accessibility guidelines, but also in particular areas and categories. We did see some fairly notable shifts in the technology correlations or correspondences of technologies to accessibility issues. What was most interesting is that we saw more a broader disparity of those issues. In other words, some technologies are getting much worse, more detectable errors. Other technologies are neutral or are getting better. And again, I think that serves as a bit of a framework. One I just want to highlight a little bit is Gatsby. Gatsby is a framework based on React, and it fared better than any of the others of the frameworks and technologies that we analyzed. It's a technology, I think, that has helped build a culture and an environment of accessibility and inclusion, and that is being reflected in the actual accessibility of the pages that use that technology. And if more were to embrace that type of thing, I think we could really make a difference.
That's awesome. I took the results that you had and I used that as a springboard to start reaching out to different folks and try and get them to take the GAD Pledge, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Just one more quick question. How do you think is the best approach to change developer culture? Because I feel like the frameworks are a good place to start, and coding boot camps, though I don't know quite how to influence them. Are there any others or any approach to the boot camps that you could think of?
Boy, it's a big question. I'll try to answer it quickly. I think our experience, in doing this work for now 20 years at WebAIM, has been that when accessibility becomes real, when it becomes personal for somebody that's designing, developing, building things, then that's when we start to see better change, more positive influences for that accessibility change. And we spend a lot of time focusing on guidelines and techniques and numbers and percents that I've talked about. I think it's important that we not lose vision that we're talking about people, about individuals that are significantly impacted. And I think when our frameworks, our tools, the environments, the communities that we're building, when they really become human focused, that's when we start to see that better change. And I think we could do a better part of that in these communities, in the documentation, things like that, to help build that type of human awareness as opposed to just technical awareness.
Great. Thank you so much, Jared, for all of your work over the years and your vision as well. Really appreciate you joining. Now I'd like to introduce Sharon Rush, who is another legend in the accessibility space. Sharon just came out of running a 2-week conference that she turned to be virtual in a very short period of time, turned on a dime, basically. And she collaborated with us on talking about accessibility in EdTech, specifically K-12. So Sharon, please introduce yourself, speak through to the report, and also give us a bit of a report on how Access U went.
Well, as you know, Joe, we just had two days and 2 days last week of Access U, where we had to move our conference completely online. And I'm getting ready to write a book about what to do when all your connectivity explodes and you want to go forward and talk about accessibility. And there are just so many aspects of it that we learned over this time. And I wanted, first of all, to thank you and the team. I was really, really pleased to be asked to contribute to this report. I was honored and really grateful to talk about this particular aspect of the state of accessibility, because I think it's one that's been overlooked. As I was listening to Jared talk about all the the different tools and the frustrations that people have, and when you think about kids in school and what's at stake in that environment, it becomes really even more important. And I don't know if you've already introduced me, but I'll just tell people that I'm Sharon Rush. I'm the executive director of Knowbility. We are a nonprofit advocacy, training, and consultancy organization based in Austin, Texas, and working all over the country and some parts of the world. As I said, I'm really grateful to be talking about this particular aspect of the state of accessibility, and I'm with you, Jared, about, let's do Global Accessibility Action Day from this. One of the things we do more community-based research, I would say, than WebAIM, and we certainly have nowhere near 1 billion points of data, but we have been looking at the K-12 space for many years in our communities, and found that the accessibility of web-based tools in K-12 has really been a neglected topic. And when you think about what happens, that oversight has really profound results on learning outcomes, and as a result of that, the lives of students with disabilities. And there are, from the closest estimates from the UN, is that there are around 93 million children with disabilities who are of school age. Not all of them make it into school, and certainly many of them don't graduate. So this chart shows a few of the examples of the outcomes by selected countries. But nowhere in the world, I mean, we show these few countries, but there was nowhere in the world where we found anything close to the equity, the educational equity that's promised to kids with disabilities. And we'd hope and expect improved outcomes and improved access as learning tools are delivered digitally. We have this flexible, adaptable medium of the web. We have laws in place all over the world that say students with disabilities get equal access to opportunities and to educational supports. We have these digital tools that can make learning experiences fully accessible. We have laws, we have guidelines, as Jared pointed to. So with all these standards and laws and promises that we make to students with disabilities, what's happened? What's missing? And so we did a lot of literature research. We read quite a bit. We interviewed some educators and administrators from different districts, from educational agencies, from state educational agencies. And a lot of that research, I think, it ended up in the annotated bibliography here of the SOAR. And what we found was that there's a basic lack of understanding of what accessibility means. And there's almost, I shouldn't say complete, there's an almost complete lack of systematic support for accessibility. So we have these stated commitments, we have legal requirements that all students will have educational equity, but almost no scaffolding in place to support those commitments in a digital world. So what we see is that teachers aren't trained. You know, they give these assignments and tell kids to use these digital tools. They're not trained about accessibility. We educate according to law. I mean, the law requires that kids with disabilities, students with learning disabilities, visual impairments, emotional and behavioral disorders, they're all to be educated in the most inclusive environments possible. So that means they're, for the most part, in general education classes with educators who are not trained in any of the accessibility aspects of the digital tools that they use in the classroom every day. Instructional designers aren't trained. They make these curriculum products, lessons, math exercises. They're not taught about accessibility. They don't know how to prompt for alt text. Students are asked to do their homework and turn in, you know, make a web page for this, or use these various frameworks, open source frameworks, as you mentioned, and create digital examples of what you're learning. But nowhere are the accessibility aspects or features of those tools taught, because the teachers themselves, the instructional designers themselves, aren't aware of them. So the result is that we have, in the classrooms, we have these learning management systems, curriculum, content, they're all put in place. Schools increasingly, gratefully receive tablet and software donations from large tech companies, but nowhere along that the training that they get is there any consideration of how these required classroom materials can be equally used by students with disabilities. So it's not surprising that the outcomes are so dismal for students with disabilities, and that we have the outcomes that you see in that chart. The dropout rates are, far in excess of what you see among their non-disabled peers. And that's not because of intellectual disabilities, because more than 80% of students with disabilities have no intellectual disabilities, and there's no reason why they should not succeed. So, I was really envious that Jared was able to say, but we do see these improvements, and we do see these improvements. And I'm trying to think of, what can I say that's hopeful? And I think the hope is that as we do integrate accessibility into the open source frameworks, as it becomes more generally integrated into the tools, that will make its way into the classroom. But we had some specific recommendations as well that we put into the report. And it starts with planning, with, our US Department of Education, almost every country's Department of Education has planning for how they're going to use technology in the classroom. And so as those technology plans are developed, we need to, through advocacy, through more legal actions, through legislation, we need to require those technology plans explicitly include ideas and mandates for accessibility. They need to have requirements, procurement requirements. They need to include training for instructional tool. So if I work for a district and I'm going to purchase tools, then I need to have guidelines for how do I decide if these meet accessibility requirements. All schools have requirements now for security. They need to have equally supported requirements for accessibility. We also need to think, as we train instructional designers, the people who are making the curriculum products that end up in our classrooms, those designers also must be trained to understand accessibility, what the requirements are, and how to implement them properly, so that the materials that end up in the classroom are, in fact, at least meet basic requirements. And I think sorry?
No, this is great stuff, Sharon, and I'm so glad that you spoke about this. It's that EdTech is not my specialty, and as we're watching the entire world and all the schools move online within the period of 2 weeks, everything is now about accessibility. So there's an opportunity here. You were looking for something positive. There's an opportunity here where we can see that if things are fixed for the different platforms, it impacts all of these students at once. So that's the only hopeful thing, is that maybe we can come out of this with some improved accessibility if we basically approach these vendors that are providing these virtual tools. So thank you so much for joining and for providing this report. And I recommend everybody read it. It was really eye-opening. So thank you.
You bet.
Yeah. Thanks. And now we have Jennison, who joined us, the co-founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Jennison, can you turn on your camera? Happy GAD, my friend.
Good morning, somewhere.
How are you doing?
This is the first year because we're in this virtual world. By the way, happy GAD, everyone. Because we're doing everything virtually, people have been asking us to attend different sessions, and the unintended consequences, lack of sleep and stuff. But let's see, I was in Azerbaijan, and then I was across the continent of Africa, and then I'm here with you all. Actually, this is people from around the world, and then we've got 2 more things, including wrapping up here in the Bay Area tonight for an event. But how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right.
I wasn't sure if we were just going to riff here or what.
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes more. I really just wanted to know if you've had a chance to check out what's going on today.
Well, Twitter's gone crazy, as usual.
Yeah.
The hashtag, GAD hashtag has been going nuts. And I still see Joe and I get copied on when the forms are submitted for people are still, up until now, submitting events for GAD. This is, I don't know if you already mentioned, Joe, when you kick things off for the session here, but we are amazed every year at how big this has gotten. And neither of us were sure this year what was going to happen with COVID and like what was all going to happen, but everyone flipped to virtual. The advantage, of course, being that we can all kind of travel around the world and join these Zoom or other conferencing software, mainly Zoom now, but just have more access, right? In capital A for access.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
no, it's been different this year, but it's been different but the same.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And this is really the moment for accessibility to shine, because either you're making it accessible for the billion people with disabilities, though I think that number really
It's a higher.
Yeah, it's really higher. One of the new numbers, and I don't know if I can say his name, but yeah, maybe I won't say it. But basically, a friend of ours, highlighted that that there's some new research out that 2.2 billion people have a visual impairment, and if you add those numbers together, the number of folks with a disability is pretty high. So.
It's a lot of visually impaired people.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. So, Jennison, I'm going to ask you to stay on as I introduce Matt.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the GAD Pledge a little bit. So we've taken the numbers that we gotten from Jared, and we're just a little bit shocked to see 98% of the web being inaccessible and 60 errors per page, and seeing those numbers go up. So really, like, we came back and said, all right, how can we affect and change those numbers? And as I said earlier, coding schools was one of them, and another one of them is open source projects. We really wanted to focus on the open source projects. Okay, so the GAD Pledge, the concept here is that organizations and developers can make a commitment that they will make accessibility a core value in all of their digital products. And, you know, in a sense, we're opening it up to everyone, that anyone can take the GAD Pledge, but we decided that we would try and kind of focus it a little bit and try and get actual strong results rather than making it too wide of an approach. And so what we've done is we've gone out and spoken to a lot of different organizations, and I'm super excited about what's coming down the pike. But one of the big targets for me personally that I wanted to see was seeing ReactNative take the pledge. So I called 1-800-Facebook and said, hey, guys, how would you guys like to take the pledge? And was so excited and happy to see that they said yes. So Facebook does take the pledge, and to that end, they are committing to making ReactNative accessible, and they've brought us, Matt King from Facebook has joined us, and I'm going to ask you, Matt, if you can turn on your video. we're going to do the proper intro. So can you please introduce yourself and describe your role at Facebook?
Yeah, so my name is Matt King. I am an accessibility technical program manager at Facebook. And what that really means is that I spend my time helping our teams build up their capabilities to deliver accessible products. And I also spend a lot of time working on what I refer to as the accessibility ecosystem infrastructure of the world. And things like ReactNative are part of the bedrock of that ecosystem, as well as all the accessibility standards like Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, ARIA, Rich Internet Application Standard, and so forth.
Thank you. So you guys have taken the GAD Pledge, and ReactNative is going to have some serious effort behind it to make it more accessible. So what do you think ReactNative will look like a year from now?
That is a pretty interesting question, because I think part of the problem is that we don't know what it looks like right now. We do know there's a lot of accessibility in ReactNative already. If you go to the GitHub repo and just search on accessibility, you find there's been more than 100 issues related to accessibility closed. There's currently about 10 that are tagged with the accessibility API info label in there, and only 2 of them are open. So a lot of work has been done, but what we really haven't done yet is like fully understand where the gaps are. And that's one of the reasons why there will be an accessibility bug hunt coming up for ReactNative. And so what I hope is that we'll have a much more solid picture of what needs to change in ReactNative to create truly robust accessibility, and that we will see a positive trend toward getting those gaps closed.
That's very cool. And, you know, I think people would be surprised at how quickly this came together, because there is so much work that goes into just making an announcement of this type. And kudos to the accessibility team over at Facebook for, without hesitation, going in and saying, yes, we are committing to make ReactNative accessible. And it's really important, because I believe this can provide some leadership to the other frameworks to say, you know what, we'll have the courage to say this as well. And having spoken to different frameworks, I sense, they won't say it out loud, but I sense that there's some fear about coming out there and saying, yes, we take the pledge, because what if they don't quite get there, or are they going to get criticism from the community, and that type of thing. So I'd love to hear from you. How do you feel would be a way for us to approach other frameworks, and can you address that fear and how to bridge that gap? Because I believe there is a desire by most developers to actually make their work accessible.
Well, I think an important part of this, first of all, is we have to help people understand there really isn't that much to fear. I mean, the only way we can make progress in these important initiatives is just by taking one little step at a time. And often the first step is, in any project, the scariest step. When you're stepping into an unknown space, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what kind of troubles are ahead of you. And so I think letting people know that, one, we have some experience to build on with projects like what's happening in ReactNative. So there's a model to follow, and you can learn from that. We can help and support other projects in following along in that journey. And it's going to be a different journey for every project, but there's going to be a lot of common lessons and things that we can learn from all of them that'll elevate the whole industry.
Thank you. Now, do you think there's anything else that we can do? Like it really has to be the developer culture, the maker culture that that changes, that makes this a stronger focus. What do you feel needs to happen, or do you have any other ideas of how to improve the numbers? Because 98% inaccessible is just a horrifying number, and it got worse. Not by much, because there isn't much room to get worse, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we should cry, but sometimes you just gotta laugh, right? I mean, it's so awful at times that it's ridiculous. I think we gotta check a lot of our assumptions at the door. So I have this feeling that a lot of people think accessibility is solved in the sense that we really know how to do it. And there is a big difference between knowing how to make an image accessible by putting alt text on it. That's great. Do that for one image. Now do it for 1 trillion images. Like, there's a difference between knowing how to do it and then knowing how to make something work at scale in large companies across entire industries. And people also assume that just because we have technologies like screen readers and screen magnifiers and all kinds of other assistive technologies, like that we know, how to make things accessible to people who are blind. This is just simply not the case. Like, fundamentally, I still see accessibility in a lot of ways as it's super complicated for engineers, it's super complicated for end users, it's super complicated for everybody still. And this is where, number one, starting with awareness, we had to get not thousands, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of people thinking about how to solve these problems. The only way it became feasible to create software on the web is because hundreds of thousands of developers started doing things like building React and all the other toolkits that are out there that speed up development. We have to do that same kind of work in the accessibility space. Starts with awareness, number one, commitment, number two, and then just broad-based support, like deep levels of support across organizations. And so we just need to keep building that up, keep checking our assumptions at the door, and keep our eyes on the goal.
Yeah, I love how you're saying that, because we're reaching apparently 195 million users on the hashtag, and somebody is going to have an idea that's going to change. Somebody's going to take an action. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned from GAD is that if you attach vision to community, you can affect change. I wrote a blog post on mysqltalk.com, which had maybe 10 users, and today we're reaching about 200 million users for just an idea. So let's not be fatalistic and say, well, what can we do to approach the developers that are basically that are leading the industry, that people learn from, and start to change the culture. Let's be positive about it. Let's give everybody a chance to improve things, but you are the change. Whoever can hear what I'm saying, you are the change. Think about this problem. Look at that report and think about how can we solve this. And so now with that, I would like to invite all of the presenters to turn their cameras and come back on, and we're going to do some Q&A. And I want to get to as many questions as possible. So if we can kind of keep the answer brief, whoever has the answer, go for it, and let's keep it brief. So Jennison and Sharon and Jared, please come back in. And the first question is from Melissa Del Rio. What kind of tools are out there for testing if our website is fully accessible? Are there Google Chrome extensions for this or something?
I can take a stab at that one, which is we developed the tool. So it's a little self-promotional. We do have the WAVE, that's W-A-V-E, accessibility tool. That's one of many tools that are out there. We have an online version, a Chrome extension. Acts. There's a lot of tools out there. I do want to address one part of the question, and that is that no tool can tell you if a web page or website is accessible. It can identify accessibility or compliance issues. Manual testing, functional testing is always going to be necessary, but we have good accessibility guidelines that can help inform and drive that type of testing.
Thanks, Jared. Next up from Kristen Kazamaki. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Love the GAD Action Day idea. As a UX researcher and designer, I can have influence within a web development teams. Our community could be, whoa, I lost it there. Our community, could be a good place to do more outreach. I'm looking to get more training to be able to communicate human user customer accessibility needs and connect with others who have the same desire. So I guess this is a training question.
Well, I can take a stab at that one. We just finished 4 days of Access U, which is our annual conference to provide training across all kinds of roles. And we have regular webinars every month. We do quite a bit of training here at Knowbility. And in fact, that's kind of how we started, was as a community training and awareness organization. So that said, there are also online, DQ University has a number of courses. IAAP also is a great place to find training. And WebAIM. WebAIM's website is a great place to start with a lot of free resources, as well as the Web Accessibility Initiative at the W3C. They have a course that they just released, a video course that's just really terrific, and it's completely free.
Thank you. Next up, Christopher Dobson. Has there been recommendations for authoring OER content? OER Commons, OpenAuthor, Merlot Content Builder, Pressbooks. I have no idea what all of this means, but I'm sure one of you do. Or maybe you don't. All right. There are no recommendations I know of. Sorry, Chris. Brian Sletton, do you see, good to see your face here. So do you see the potential for extended or periodic schooling from home in the pandemic, putting pressure on the tool developers to improve accessibility?
I would hope that that's the case. I mean, the whole thing about schools, was that directed to Brian?
No, Brian is the questioner. He's a world-class speaker, but I would like you to answer.
Yes. And I do think that the COVID crisis has really brought a lot of attention to this problem, because kids with disabilities, when they're in the classroom, they have more support than they do at home. And so the fact that we're so reliant now on the web and the digital tools has brought that to a greater awareness. But again, there's that difference between awareness and action. So I'm taking that away. We've got to make that into a plan of action.
Yeah, I would say that also many of the frustrations that many of us, especially our kids, have experienced in transitioning to a digital environment are the types of frustrations that those with disabilities experience every day. And so, I hope it's bringing more light to this. What we need to do is exert more pressure on those vendors to change, improve.
Thank you. Chadwick Turner, a VR guy, asks, Sharon Joe, are you aware of XR experiences that can help teachers and or legislators and or tech executives understand what an inaccessible world is like? So I guess it's open to everyone. Matt might want to take that one.
Yeah, I have heard of some people working in the space. There's a lot of work going on in an organization called XR Access that Facebook and the Oculus team are part of, in terms of, what's immediately available right now. I am not current on that for this specific use case. But I believe if you just go to XR Access, I'm pretty sure it's xraccess.org, that you can find the resource, or for that matter, follow up with me directly afterwards.
There's also a meetup group recently started by Thomas Logan, who's now out in Tokyo. You might want to tweet at Tech Thomas to ask him the question, because he's also involved with the XR Access, but he's just another resource. But there is this A11Y VR meetup group that's spun up, and they might be helpful as well.
I would also really highly recommend our keynote. One of our keynotes at Access U this year was Jamie Knight from the BBC, and the research that he's done and the VR experimentation that they've done there is also really fascinating. So I would look up Jamie Knight and at the BBC and look into the work that he's doing, because it's exciting and fascinating.
Thank you, Sharon. Somebody asked about the SOAR report, was asking about the statistics there that it only went from 2015. But what we've got here is, I think you were probably looking at the old SOAR report. The actual numbers are, it went all the way up to 2258 lawsuits in 2018, and 2019 it went down a little bit by 2 to 2256 lawsuits, but 2020 might look very different because a lot of people are affected by COVID. So the last question that we have time to take is, and we're probably too late already, link to Sharon's report. So Sharon's report was actually part of the entire State of Accessibility report, and that will be available at diamond.la/SOAR, SOAR. And I think we have a slide that mentions it as well. So thank you to the panelists for joining us. It was really an honor to have you share your insights. Now let's go up one, and I'm going to try and get through the next section. So for me, GAD is really about my father. His inability to bank independently led to the creation of GAD. My dad survived Auschwitz and Dachau and saw the first GAD, but did not survive to the second one. His very last wish, as he was dying of cancer, was to make sure we took care of our mom, who suffers from dementia. I can proudly say my brother and I gave every last drop to honor that wish. And on the eve of Global Accessibility Awareness Day yesterday, we needed to put my mom on hospice. Accessibility is personal. It's personal for me, and it's personal for billions. And sooner or later, it will hit everyone. Please learn about accessibility for your future self, for your loved ones, and for your fellow human. I love you, Mom, and happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day to everyone. Thanks.